Hello and welcome to a WEM Extra. So this recorded session is going to be about writing materials for young learners. The first thing I want to make clear is that everything we cover on the course in our normal sessions, if you like, are always relevant for young learners. But obviously, there are some things that are very young learner specific, and we thought that we'd talk about them in a separate extra video. We are talking about writing for young learners. I'll just mention why we might want to talk about young learner writing. Some of you will be teaching young learners, some of you will be creating materials already for young learners. Some of you might not really have much of an interest in writing for young learners, but maybe an opportunity will come up in the future. You don't know what's around the corner. And I think I'm right in saying that the opportunities for writing materials for young learners are probably greater than for any other sector, because there's so many things that you can be writing. Some of these things are the same, okay, so class books, workbooks, etc., but some of them are specifically key to young learners. So let's just have a little look at what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to look at 4 areas, really. We're going to look at different types of young learners, what's different about YL materials compared to materials for older students, for adults. We're going to look at some features more closely of primary materials. And then finally, I'm going to suggest just a few useful resources, things that I find very handy when I'm writing materials for young learners. So first thing to talk about is terminology. On the one hand, young learners covers a broad spectrum of ages. And then within those age groups, we have different ways of referring to primary, secondary, etc. And so sometimes it makes it difficult because sometimes we aren't fully aware of an offer of writing that comes up. They might say, can you write for this context? And we might not be sure what that means. So what do we mean by the different age groups and how should we refer to them? This is a document that you can download from the British Council. It's a poster. And basically what they've tried to do here is they've tried to come up with, if you like, some terminology that we can use across the board. And more, this is the terminology that you'll see publishers using as well. So if you look very briefly at the table there, it shows the life stage, which of course is very important in terms of young learners. So preschoolers, the age range is 2 to 5, and the correct term that we should be using are early years. So if you see an advert saying early years materials writer needed, you'll know that this will refer to materials for 2 to 5-year-olds. And obviously that will have an impact on the kind of materials that we will be creating. Then we go through to primary age, 6 to 10, and that's primary. Sometimes this is broken down into lower primary and upper primary, okay, depending. Then we have secondary from 11 to 14, which is lower secondary, and secondary from 15 to 17, which is upper secondary. And then we have university students 18 to 25, which is young adults, and in some contexts still considered to be a young learner. So that's the first thing I think to consider. As a terminology, you will have your way of referring to different things, okay? And most of the time that's probably fine. But there are discussions going on at the moment about some of these issues. So children or kids? I usually refer to them as children, okay? But I know that many people refer to them as kids. And the British Council's Young Learner websites are divided into teens and kids, okay? But some people are saying that kids is disrespectful, and they prefer us to use children. So something to think about. Then when we're writing our materials, do we call them students? Do we call them pupils? Do we call them children? Do we call them learners? And I raise this issue, this point, because some publishers will have their protocol. They'll say to you, when you're writing the materials, especially a teacher's book, for example, please use this term. Please use pupils, please use learners, etc. I would say the advice I would give would be to just choose one and be consistent with it. And then this last one here I've put here because in the past you used to see in teacher books references to parents, always parents. But of course, not all young learners have parents at home. Not all children live with their parents, and there might be a whole range of reasons for that. So more and more recently, we've been coming across the term caregivers. We can say parents and caregivers, or we can simply say caregivers. And again, this is something you will come across. Whether you decide to use caregivers, that's up to you. Let's have a little look at the differences for us as materials writers. First of all, I'm just going to talk about the obvious differences, okay? So when we write materials for young learners, we are usually writing materials that are going to be used by children with some kind of support from a teacher or a caregiver, or somebody else, okay? Obviously, there are self-study materials that we create too, but most of the time, the obvious difference for me in any case is that there is a lot more information that we need to be considering to go into the teacher's accompanying notes, if you like. We'll look at some of that in a minute. So also the reason why children learn. Why are children learning English? Well, because it's obligatory in most cases, okay? And that has a knock-on effect as well, because we have to follow, usually, a very strict guide or curriculum. So let's have a quick look at some of these differences in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the stakeholders, I've already mentioned that adults is not usually obligatory, okay, unless of course a business is telling their staff that they have to get a certain level of English or whatever. But for young learners, it's often obligatory. The stakeholders and the people who are interested have an interest in the materials. So with adults, we've got a teaching institution, we've got maybe a workplace, there might be exams, syndicates, and publishers. And then with young learners, you can see we've got a lot more, okay? So we have to keep these people happy, if you like, with our materials. We've got the schools and colleges and academies, then we've got the national curriculum, we've got the Ministry of Education, and depending on the country, they can have more or less input into what they want to see in the materials, and in many cases what they don't want to see. Then we've got the parents or caregivers. Then we've got global organizations. So one example I've put here is the United Nations, because they say now that they want to see, for example, references to sustainability, etc. So we've got these institutions having their input as well. Then we've got the exam syndicates, more and more exams. Every 2 years, a new exam comes out for a younger group of learners. It's a big, big area of consideration that publishers almost always take into consideration. And then we've got the publishers. Then the theories that we resort to when we write our materials. Well, with adults, we've got all the usual theories that we might be talking about on the course, about language learning and how that drips into the materials we create. And with children, with young learners, we have all of those, but then we also have theories on child development. So if we create some materials, for example, for a 5-year-old, they won't be the same as for a 7-year-old, just because of their cognitive abilities. And they are things that we need to take into account and how children learn. Okay. And then the content. So actually what we write. So usually for adults, the main focus is language. And then we might decide to bring in specific content on different topics, etc. But usually it's language. For business English, it might be a little bit different. There might be other considerations, if you like, and for special purposes, etc. But for children, we might be teaching language. Well, we will be teaching language, but there might be other things as well. So they might be other subjects. So I'm not just talking about CLIL, content and language integrated learning. I'm also talking about sometimes just cross-curricular that goes into the scope and sequence when we're designing a curriculum. And then there are non-linguistic skills that we have to include in our materials because teachers learn these skills and develop these skills at school. So the teacher's responsibility to help them develop certain skills, like learning how to write, etc. And it's the responsibility of all teachers, if you like. So it comes into the materials as well. And then other things too, like values. And I could go on, okay, but this is just to give you an idea. And then there's a difference with the materials, with the teachers, sorry. So usually when it's adults, you have an English teacher. But with young learners, the teacher might not necessarily be a specialized English teacher. And that means that when you're writing materials, what you should do is always think about a teacher who might not have a particularly good level of English or knowledge of English. And this is something that I've come across quite a lot. Sometimes I've come across teachers with an A1 level of English. And what that means is that the teacher notes, if you like, to go with the materials have to be written very clearly. We have to think about the language we use and just make things as easy to use as possible. And then in terms of materials, there are lots more components. All of you will know, I'm sure, recognize when you see teachers going into class, you always know which of those teachers are teaching young learners because they go in with big bags full of extra resources and extra things. There's loads of extras. And that's good for us as materials writers because obviously somebody has to create them. They might be games, flashcards, posters, poster packs, and those things don't just come from nowhere. A materials writer has actually sat down and created them. Okay, so let's move on now and have a quick look at some features of materials for young learners. Thinking about the impact that this has on you as a materials writer. So the first one, most YL materials are classified by age before level. This is big, okay? This is big. And obviously we will also classify them by level, but imagine a class of 11-year-olds. Everybody in that class will be 11 and the materials they'll be using are the same. So obviously there'll be mixed abilities in that class. That every young learner class is mixed ability, every single one. That means that we have to think about that in our materials. And how do we do that? Well, maybe by having different options, given choice, adding extra challenge exercises or more support exercises, etc. But it's a big one. The next one is that small children are egocentric and their world is very small. So anyone who's taught children will know what this is like. And what this means for us as materials writers is that we have to consider things like pair work. Okay, so pair work doesn't work for early years children and for younger primary. It just doesn't work because the children want to, they don't want to take turns. They might be learning to take turns, but it can fail. Okay, group work as well has to be really thought out. So if you're doing a project, there have to be distinct roles given. But if you're doing a craft, for example, if you write a nice worksheet on how to make a craft, it has to be something that's done individually so that every child is able to take their craft home, or it has to be done, if it's done as a group and there's one product at the end, it has to remain in the classroom, okay, or things will end in tears. The third point here is about no writing books. So I'm just going to talk about that for a minute, because this is something that's come about probably in the last 10 years, I think, where because class books are expensive, lots of countries around the world brought in this rule where the class book had to be a no writing class book, so that another child could use the same book the following year and they could reuse the books for a number of years. So in theory, this is good because it's recycling and we're into recycling. And in some places, this is the case and it's been a positive experience. And in some places, it hasn't really worked very well. But what it means for us as materials writers is that if the children are using a class book which they can't writing, then the nature of the exercises and activities that we create have to be considered, if you like. So, for example, we can't just say write true or false because they can't write. Okay, so they'll have to it'll say true or false, or there might be a little icon sending the children off to do something in their notebook or whatever. If you have a gap fill in a text in a book that they can't write in, you can't have a line because the children will just automatically write a word on that line and they're not supposed to be writing. So there has to be a little icon of some kind. Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about. It's one of those things that it's a restraint that makes us more creative, I think. So let's have a look at some of the others. Okay, the last point here is this thing where I put about the national curriculum. So in lots of countries, more and more, in the national curriculum, you have things like values, 21st century skills, social emotional learning competencies, and other things, okay? And all of this has to be incorporated into the materials that you make. So what this means is that we have to think of everything. So we might make a worksheet, or we might make a nice listening activity. We've got everything done. We've got some pre-listening questions, some comprehension questions, etc., etc. And then we look at the page and we have to think, okay, have I ticked all those boxes? And usually we won't have ticked them because there are so many little extra things. But in actual fact, lots of them are common sense. So for example, with values learning, we'll have a list of values, and they might be things like teach the children to show empathy towards their classmates, or encourage them to take turns, etc. And what you can do is you can build in something to an existing activity very often. So they might sort of do something, and then you might add an extra task, which is share your idea with a classmate or something like that. So, but there are things that we can't ignore. Obviously, if you're writing the materials for your own classes, you can more or less do whatever you consider to be the best thing. But I think it's worth taking into consideration what publishers are doing, because they've done a lot of research and there'll be a reason for most of what they do. So let's move on. Let's have a look at a typical primary class book to see what's in a unit. And those of you who've taught primary won't be surprised by any of this, but basically this is what we have in every unit. And I'm talking more or less globally. Okay, so we've got some things are the same as for adults. We've got vocab, grammar, etc. And the ones in bold there are the ones that are specific, I think, to primary. So we'll have a story lesson, we'll have a song lesson, we'll have a chant or a rhyme. This is often linked to pronunciation, and we might have a separate phonics lesson, but they'll be there somewhere. We'll have culture, then we'll have cross-curricular. So we'll have a science lesson or a maths lesson. Basically, these pages of soft CLIL, as they're called, will be, at their best, there'll be a topic that the children are studying at this age in that subject. But that's not always possible for obvious reasons. But so it'll be I see these pages or these spreads usually as an opportunity to have a nice and meaty reading and teach some language that we don't often have the opportunity to include, some more specialist language. Then we'll have a values section that might be a part of a page. Then we might have at the back of the book at the back of the book, we might have festivals pages, projects pages, crafts pages, etc. Okay, that's just a kind of overview of what you might expect in a primary unit. Some of these things you will be used to writing, and some of these things might be new. And that's quite nice, isn't it? It's quite good to try out new things. The best way, I think, to address any of these, if you're asked to contribute to a course book and they say, you know, can you write these pages or whatever, is just to look at what is in existing books and think, okay, that's the kind of thing that they'll be expecting, and then go off and do even better job. What we're going to look at now, we're going to look at some key features that we can consider ourselves when we are writing materials for young learners, specifically for primary here, but older ones too. Things that we need to keep in mind to support the learners, but also to support the teachers who might be using the materials. And again, to tick some of those boxes that the ministry might have put in there for us. So let's have a look at a list. Okay, so the first thing, choice. It's a really good idea to offer choice to any language learner, I think, or anybody studying anything. But if you look at the child development gurus of their days, like Montessori, etc., they were proponents of offering choice, and this can be done in so many different ways. You can think of ways to do this yourself. So you can have the same materials for all the children, but you might be able to offer choice in different ways. For example, the order in which they do an activity, or whether they do it alone or with a friend. I've seen things, for example, where you have choose whether to do the odd numbers or the even numbers in a list of exercises, etc. And there's a whole theory about the illusion of choice, which we use with children sometimes. But choice is key when you have mixed ability classes. Um, Color coding. Okay, so we use color coding a lot when we are teaching young learners. And okay, so we're going to have a look now at some of the features of materials for primary. Some of them go on into lower secondary as well. I've got a slide that I'll show you in a second, but first of all, I thought I'd just show you some in a course book. So color coding. Okay, so this is just the syllabus at the beginning of the book, and if you look at that, you can see that each unit has its own color, and then when you get to that unit, obviously it'll be mirrored. Let's have a little look here. So another thing, we've got a lot of icons. This is a think activity. I don't know if you can see that, and it's got a little think bubble. We use a lot of icons. You might not be able to see from there, but the photos of the children who appear in the book are all of a similar age or an older age to the children who'll be using the book. Okay, and that's key as well. There's lots of lovely, you'll notice like illustrations, lots of color, etc., but quite clear as well. So all the text is in white boxes with black font. Lots of examples. So we've got speech bubbles here, again, color coded, A and B. So when we've got when we're asking when we're expecting the learner to speak, we give them an instruction and we give them an example. They need an example. Again, we've got more little icons here. Collaborate, that means they got to do a group task. Lots of signposting. Okay, so go to the activity book, etc., that page. Okay, we've got lots of colored pointers here where where they can recreate. This is a grammar table basically, but it's very, very easy to understand because of the way that it's presented on the page. A lot of design goes into, well, a lot of designing decisions go into creating primary materials that we might not even consider for older students. Let's have a look if there are any more things here. This is a cross-curricular page. Okay, so again, the child in the picture will be of the same age or a little bit older than the children using the materials. That way that they can relate to them. And usually there's a mix of photos of real children and illustrations, etc. So let's go to a slide and see if I've picked up some of those things. So choice is an important feature for primary materials. This is nothing new. All of the child development specialists from the early 1900s, and people like Montessori, etc., spoke about the importance of offering choice to children as they develop, as they learn, because they will be more motivated, and they'll kind of just it's about motivation. And for materials, how we can do this is we can offer ideas of how the teacher can offer choice in the classroom with the materials that we create. Color coding, you've seen there, that's very important for support in children's materials. Using icons for signaling, always putting examples, using the same age models. It's probably obvious why they do this, but basically, if you're 8 years old and you're given a book and there's pictures of 5-year-olds in it, you think, well, they're babies. I'm bigger than that. That's the reasoning behind this. Um, think activities. We include them. Okay, some of the activities in that book I just showed you was think. Think, pair, share is another common one that we use with young learners. So an activity might be, there might be a question, but instead of answering it, the rule is, or the rubric, if you like, is think, pair, share. So the children think first, then they tell a partner, and then when they feel confident about their idea, they'll share it with the teacher and the rest of the class. Then we've got things like localization, personalization. Usually we've got a mix, as I said, as I showed you with the photos and illustrations. One thing that's interesting with primary materials and also lower secondary up to a point is that lots of the reading materials are actually read and listen. So this, I think, is a little bit different to adults' materials. So we have a text, but they'll read it, but the teacher can, if they want to, play the audio as well. So this gets them, because they're learning to read, aren't they? This is the reasoning for this. Then we might have footer notes at the bottom of the page with some instruction of some homework task or something simple like go home and tell somebody 3 things you learned today. We do a lot more recycling as well with young learner materials. So we do this, I think, with all materials. But if we're creating a whole course book, they'll often be we draw up a big table, if you like, so that we don't miss out some of the recycling, so that they learn something in Unit 1, they practice it a little bit in Unit 2, then again in Unit 4, and there might be some sort of cumulative task with the language they're learning, etc. This home link is key, I think, and then lots of can do for evaluation. So there you've seen some of the features of primary materials, and as I said, some of them move up into younger lower secondary as well. So when we create materials, we find resources around us everywhere, don't we? We have our go-to favorites, we have websites that we might go to, we have books that we refer to, we get our ideas from everywhere. So I thought I'd just share one or two of my regular go-to places, if you like, places that I've got as favorites, on websites, etc., that I save because I use them so frequently. So let's have a little look at some of those. We'll go through them just quickly, and you can play around with them at home, experiment yourself. So this first resource here is Rhyme Zone. So we write a lot of rhymes when we write in materials, especially for younger learners. That might be a song, it might be a chant or a little rhyme, etc. And even though we might be able to come up with a simple rhyme ourselves, it's this is a great resource. Okay, so you just put the word in here, we put cat, and then it'll throw up all the words with 1 syllable, 2 syllables, etc., etc. So this is something that I use almost on a daily basis. This next one I'm going to show you is a dictionary for kids. Remember we were talking about children or kids? Well, this is American Merriam-Webster dictionary, and it's specifically for kids. So if you are writing, if you're writing materials for young learners, you will be writing definitions. When you teach vocabulary, and then you'll say match the word to the definition, etc., or the picture, whatever. And very often, a normal traditional dictionary will be a little bit more too complex. So this dictionary, this one is perfect. So I've put in here the word tower as an example. And here you can see on the left, that's the definition for the traditional definition, a building or structure, blah, 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 typically higher than its diameter, etc. And obviously, the level of that definition is going to be too high, not just language wise, but I mean, children of 7 will not know what a diameter or a campanile, whatever, are, transmission, etc. So the kids' definition says a tall, narrow building or structure that may stand by itself or be attached to a larger structure. So we can take that one and we can tweak it to suit our needs. It's a good starting point, if you like. This is another one, okay? Kids Wordsmith. And this gives us some extra stuff, okay? So it tells us, whether it's a noun or a verb, it's got some features, it's got definition, and then it's got an example sentence. So again, you can take the information from here and then change it to make it your own, but they're both equally useful. The BBC Bite Size has got a lot of useful stuff on their website. It's not currently updated, but they've got a whole wealth of stuff that's there that you can go and you look at and take inspiration from and see what kind of things children of these ages are learning at schools in the UK to then transfer over to your materials. So again, it's classified and categorized according to age groups, so it's easy to find stuff. And then they've got all these different subjects depending on which age group you go into. So this is KS3. So you might decide that you're going to have a look at the computer science pages and see if there's an interesting text that you might be able to rewrite or work with or just use as a starting point, if you like. And then this is a really nice feature that they have, which is trending topics. And again, this is categorized into different age groups. This is updated. And it's quite good because it's quite useful, because sometimes we think, what are 4 and 5-year-olds talking about at the moment? What are their interests? So it's a good place to go to kind of see, okay, they're into this, and then, come up with your own thing. So it's worth exploring and playing around with. Okay, so just a couple of resources there, but we will be sharing more resources in the group and in the Google groups, etc. And as I come across anything that I find particularly useful in my materials writing for young learners, I'll share it with everybody. So hopefully we can build up a bank of hopeful, useful resources. So just to wind up, let's have a look at a final slide. Remember these things. Children like seeing themselves reflected in their materials. So use pictures of children, just put yourself in the shoes of the children. And the images of the children should be the same age or a bit older. Children love seeing other children doing things. So if you're writing a text about something in particular, walking or whatever, or cooking, try and find an image or draw a picture of a child doing that activity, because then the idea is the children look and they think, oh, look, if he can do it, I can do it. Include opportunities for choice, personalization, localization, etc. Use icons, and I've put here state the obvious in instructions. So, if the just think, what is it that I am asking the children to do? Okay, they have to read the text and then they have to answer the questions. So read and answer. Yeah, something as simple as that. Children like surprising facts, fun facts. I think we all do, but children more so. So that's key, I think, to successful materials for children, is finding something that they'll notice and they'll think, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I'm going to pay attention. And the last one is vital. Children need to revisit language very frequently. Oh, that's basically it. I was going to recommend some reading. I don't usually do this, but this is a book that I wrote, How to Write Primary Materials, which is quite useful. And there's another one available in the same series of ELT Teacher to Writer, which is How to Write Secondary Materials. Um, the Young Learner and Teens Special Interest Group at IATEFL has a lot of resources on their website, so look them up. And if I think of any other things and other places that might be interesting, I'll pop them in the group as well. So I will be sharing more things with you. That's all from me. I'm going to just say goodbye and I hope you enjoy the course and see you soon. Bye.